From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Wouldn't you like to be reincarnated as a taste bud on Calvin Trillin's tongue? His books, American Fried, Alice Let's Eat, and Third Helping, the so-called Tummy Trilogy, recount in wonderful detail meals he has eaten, both the good and, less frequently, the bad. In our family, we still quote one of his essays in which he quoted a daughter dismissing inferior bagels as round bread. That's not a bagel, that's just round bread. Calvin Trillin is a chronicler of pleasure, I think, not in any fussy, overly aesthetic way, but in the honest pleasure that's to be found in a stack of barbecued ribs or a decent, honest bagel or fresh corn, or as in his novel, Tepper Isn't Going Out, the pleasure of the perfect parking spot. I love what Wikipedia had to say about Tepper Isn't Going Out. It said, quote, "It is unusual among novels for exploring the subject of parking." I did not look to see if the Melville entry in Wikipedia said, "It is unusual among novels for exploring the subject of whales." Calvin Trillin started out as a journalist at Time magazine. His first pieces in The New Yorker about desegregation at the University of Georgia were published in 1963. He's been appearing regularly in its pages ever since. In the summer of 1990, prompted by the sound of John Sununu's last name, he wrote the first of a series of short poems, If You Knew What Sununu. I wonder what politician's last name would be worthy of parody now. That was in The Nation, and he continues to skewer our nation's politics and culture in verse on Deadline. In 2012, Calvin Trillin received the Thurber Prize for American Humor. He once said, "I actually think of being funny as an odd turn of mind, like a mild disability, some weird way of looking at the world that you can't get rid of. Aren't we glad that you're disabled?" His new book is called No Fair, No Fair, and Other Jolly Poems of Childhood. It is illustrated by his New Yorker accomplice, Roz Chast. His poems now are often very short in The Nation, so I'm going to keep the rest of this introduction very short. Welcome all. Let's have a ball as we start chillin' with Calvin Trillin.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Can you hear me? I told John was not necessary to have some complicated introduction. Maybe just something simple like, not since Mark Twain, or something like that. If I seem in a cheerier mood than a lot of people here and less nervous about the election, it's because I already have a house in Canada. I'll make a couple of corrections to that lovely introduction or things that John left out. We think that Tepper Isn't Going Out is the first parking novel ever written. I'd also like to say about the poetry, I get paid $100 a poem no matter how long the poem is. So if I write a short poem, which is why I write short poems, I'm the highest paid poet in the United States. Most poets get paid by the line. So if I want to get the buzz you get from working at the absolute top dollar in your field, I just write even a 4-line poem. Like in 2008 election, I wrote one about Mitt Romney. Yes, Mitt is smooth of speech and smooth of garby, reminds us all of Ken and Barbie, so quick to shed his moderate regalia He may, like Ken, be lacking genitalia. The origin of this book, No Fair, No Fair, is my life experience, partly with my grandchildren, partly with my children, and partly when I was growing up with an older sister known as Suki the Oppressor. The idea of doing it in poetry started when my youngest grandson, Nady, was slow in getting dressed. He was about 7, and his mother said, "Nady, put your pants on." And I found myself saying, or actually singing, I won't trouble you with the singing, "Oh, this is such a silly rule that people must wear pants to school. A better rule," a wise man said, "was wear your underpants instead." And that sort of started me on the idea of writing a book about childhood, really. But as I say, part of it was from my own experience with Suki the Oppressor. We used to share the back seat on long trips. I lived in Kansas City, which the real estate people would call equally convenient to either coast. And my father thought that we should see the country, so we took long motor trips when we were children, and we shared the back seat. And there was an invisible line down the middle of the back seat. At least she said it was the middle. And there was a lot of tension around that line. I compared it to the tension between countries, say between the Soviet Union and Finland. I played Finland. Then my father said something that I think he meant well, but he had old-fashioned values. He said, "We do not hit girls. You will never hit your sister again." Suki was not visited with a similar injunction, so I became a unilaterally disarmed Finland. My father, meanwhile, was pointing out the buttes and the mesas. I think now, if I hadn't had to stay on a constant alert from a sister with expansionist backseat policies, I would now know the difference between a butte and a mesa. There's also a poem in here. So there's a poem it's called The Back Seat in here. There's another poem that's called To Get a Pet. Children have different ideas of pets. Those of you who are parents know this. And again, I hearken to my childhood. We had a collie puppy named Chubby, and Chubby was quite sickly. And then one day, Chubby was gone. And we said to our parents, "Where's Chubby?" And they said, "Well, Chubby, we have friends who have a farm. We thought Chubby would be happier and healthier in the farm, frolicking in the barnyard with the other animals." I didn't think much of it, and I didn't think about Chubby for a long time. Then I was home from college, and Chubby's name was brought up, and I said, "Why didn't we ever go visit Chubby at the farm?" Suki said, "There wasn't any farm, you dummy." Chubby had to be put down. And I said, "Chubby's gone?" And my mother said, "He'd be gone in any case. Collies don't usually live 18 or 20 years. I said, "Why am I just hearing about it now?" My father said, "It's not our fault you're slow on the uptake." And then about a week or so after I wrote about Chubby at some place, I got a call from Suki. She said the collie was not called Chubby. The collie was called George. You were called Chubby. There's another poem about somebody who asks the same question of children he meets, a kind of icebreaker question, which, as it happens, I ask children, just sort of to break the ice if I'm left alone with a kid. I say, who's the nastiest, awfulest, meanest kid in your whole class? You'd be surprised how often the answer is Jason. I'm not quite sure why, but those of you who are about to have a baby and are thinking of names ought to think about that. There's a poem about trying to send back a baby here. That is from the best story I ever heard about older children responding to the birth of a new child was some people I know who had a 3-year-old boy, and then they had another little boy. Everything seemed fine for about 6 weeks, and then the 3-year-old walked into their bedroom one morning and said, "I think this would be a good day to send Brendan back to his real mommy and daddy." So that's in this story. And there's some stuff about fantasy in this story that I fantasize about. There's a story about a little boy who eats everything. One of the lines is, "His tum, it seemed at times, was nearly bottomless. His dad said Matt would eat a hippopotamus." And I think that was a sort of a wish fulfillment. I had 2 girls, and one of them was a very picky eater, particularly had trouble getting vegetables down her. And one day my wife made the most elaborate concoction out of spinach. World-famous chefs would have fainted at eating this spinach. And we asked Sarah to test the spinach. She took what I used to call one of her micro bites. And then we all waited for her opinion, and she said, "Well, it's better than a carrot." We found that a very valuable phrase to use. Sometimes we'd see a movie and say, "Well, it's better than a carrot." And sometimes we'd see a movie and say, "Not quite as good as a carrot." And I think some of the poems are fantasy of my vengeance on Suki the oppressor. I mean, Suki's very nice now. Well, I once, upon Suki's request, no, I'll say upon Suki's order, dedicated a book to her. And I showed it to my wife and said, "What do you think about this as a dedication?" And it said, "To my sister, Suki Fox, and a first tentative step toward forgiving her for trying to throw me down the laundry chute in 1937. My wife said I couldn't use the laundry chute part. I said, "Why not?" She said, "It's not gracious." I said, "Attempted murder is not gracious." Suki recently had a big birthday, and we sent her a tape, and I started it by saying, "Well, you're 80 now, Suki. It occurred to me it might be an appropriate time for me to forgive you once and for all for trying to throw me down the laundry chute in 1937. But then I thought, there's time." I'd like to read one of the fantasy poems. This one's about a sister named Jenny. Jenny's a better rhyme than Suki. I'll have to get my glasses on first. This book is illustrated, by the way, as you heard, by Roz Chast, who's simply a genius. She sort of makes the book. This poem is called, not sure I can see here, excuse me, This poem is called, Could Jenny Get This Shot for Me? I've Done So Much for Her. This was actually inspired by one of my nephews who, when he was taken to the doctor for a shot, when they parked the car, said to his mom, maybe you should get this for me. I'll just wait in the car. I know the shot will guard me from the measles and the mumps, diseases that could leave me with 2 different kinds of lumps. I'm glad the stuff that's in the shot will keep me safe from harm, but can't they put the needle into someone else's arm? If so, my older sister is the person I'd prefer. Could Jenny get this shot for me? I've done so much for her. You once read her a fairy tale she loved, and ever since, she's thought a certain frog, if kissed, would turn into a prince. Remember what I did for her? I'm sure you didn't miss it. I threw my pet frog in her lap, and then I said, so kiss it. That frog was only one of many favors that there were. Could Jenny get this shot for me? I've done so much for her. Once Jenny on a summer day was in her party clothes, and seeing just how hot she was, I sprayed her with a hose. Once noticing how much how much the same her dollies all appeared, I gave one doll a different look by drawing on a beard. She has to be so grateful for my favors, there have been many, so could she get this shot for me? I've done so much for Jenny. Well, I'm sure that's given you meat for many profound questions. I've just wrecked the stage. So if anybody has any questions, step to the microphone. There's a question. Oh no, there's just a look. Questions? There's a question.
Just wondering, as the grandson of a bagel baker, once you get out of New York City, do you have a favorite place for bagels?
Well, you heard the quote from my daughter Abigail when she was 4, that in Kansas City, bagels taste just like round bread. I remember doing a column once on a new finding in emergency rooms, not in New York, but out in the country, where people cut themselves on trying to slice frozen bagel out in what I call the bagel barrens. And of course, there wasn't any problem. And one of the New York emergency room doctors said some of those places are just ethnically unprepared for bagels. But I like Montreal bagels. They're sort of sweet. And I just read a story that somebody in Cincinnati is trying to make very good bagels. But it's difficult. And of course, everybody says it's the water in New York. And they say that about the pizza too. So I don't know. I think it's just old-fashioned preparation. The bagel place near me was started by a German-Irish guy from Queens who sold to the people who ran the pizza parlor next door, who were, of course, from the Middle East. And their bagels are rolled out at night by Thais. The Thais have taken over the bagel rolling from the Dominicans. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Hi, I love you, first of all.
Oh, shucks.
I remember reading Let's Eat,
Right.
lying on the living room sofa, literally falling off because I was laughing so hard. And my question...
Well, by the way, I'm not liable for any of
Okay.
that.
No,
It's not
no
actionable.
lawsuits.
We've checked this before.
No lawsuits. The 3 writers who make me laugh out loud are P.G. Wodehouse, E.F. Benson, and Calvin Trillin. And I'm wondering who makes you laugh when you read them? Laugh out loud.
I'm not much of a laugher.
I never Never would have guessed.
But I think a lot of people, Dave Barry used to make me laugh. He sort of quit writing, kind of turned to the more lucrative area of young adult books and things, although he just wrote a book about Florida. And I used to laugh a lot at a writer who was considered sort of lowbrow, I think. It was Max Schulman. I gave one of his books to my daughter, and I could hear her laughing in her room. She was about 14. And I meant to find out where he was and write him and say, it's nice to make two generations laugh. I remember actually the passage where it's Dobie Gillis, which later became a television show, and Dobie's mother is saying, Dobie, you're going off to college, and here I am, no smarter than your hound dog Fred over in the corner playing dead. And he says, watch how you talk about Fred, Mom. Said, look at him playing dead over there. She says, Dobie, I meant to tell you. Sarah liked that as much as I did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I love the way you have those reminiscences about the rivalries. I'm in the middle of 7 kids, and you've gotten me thinking a lot about stuff that is still to be forgiven. But what I'm not hearing is your sister's perspective. What would she say in retort to some of the...
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you say it again?
What is your sister... That's what happened, okay.
No, go ahead. I really didn't hear you.
Oh, seriously then, what would be your sister's retort to some of the libelous things you're saying about her?
Well, the laundry chute incident, the attempted murder incident, is very easy. She told one of my daughters I was too fat to fit down the laundry chute. And then, I don't know, I would say that on the incursion on my side of the front seat, I would say if you read what Vladimir Putin says about the Ukraine, you get pretty much what Suki would say.
Thank you.
I also love you, and John T. Edge. For those of us who can't make your New Yorker tour of Chinatown, do you have any recommendations there?
Well, a lot of places are good. The real Chinese food freaks go to Queens or Brooklyn now, but I live about a 8 or 9 minute bike ride to Chinatown, so I tend to still go to Chinatown. One of the places we stop on, the only restaurant we stop on the tour, and it's really kind of a walk, snacking walk, is Xi'an's famous food, which has something I love called a spicy lamb and cumin sandwich. And sometimes when I go to Chinatown, I just pick up things. Like there's a place called Super Taste, which I found when I stopped on my bike because I saw what I thought was one of the best restaurant names I'd seen in New York, New City Fish Balls. And it turned out that there are a lot of hand-pulled noodle places on Eldridge Street. And the one I go to is Super Taste. And I get a bag of frozen dumplings, 50 for $9. And I put them in the freezer because I've seen those movies where the Apaches attack and then you can't go out. And I dump them in hot and boiling water and I'm done.
Thank you.
Over here. Okay, here. Over here.
You asked me who the most annoying kid in my class was, and I said, Michael. What advice can you give me for annoying kids like Michael?
You don't have any organized crime connections, I guess. This is Thea, who suffered. That's right, your name is Thea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. She has suffered from Michael. I How's your right hand punch, your hook? Is your, not good?
No.
I think in that case, I'd snitch. I would tell the teacher, get rid of that kid.
Thank you.
Or have him change his name to Jason.
You write extensively about parking in New York City, and
Right.
I'm wondering how you feel about Uber now using driverless cars. Would you be comfortable in a driverless car?
I don't think I'm quite ready for a driverless car. And parking is difficult in certain neighborhoods. And then I keep my car in a garage. I used to do the alternate side parking thing, but I've heard somebody say in New York about alternate side parking, you can either have a car or a job. It takes up your life. And a lot of people are afraid to move their cars once they get a good spot. In Tepper, I think there was a passage where that was how this young man rated the young women he met. Was she worth moving the car for? Out of the spot that was good for tomorrow.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank you for many hours of enjoyable reading. And I used to live in Kansas City, and so I was wondering what you missed most about Kansas City, if anything.
Well, everything, and I don't doubt that you lived there, but I have to say, a lot of people claim to be from Kansas City who aren't, just for the prestige.
I really am from Kansas City.
I'm glad to hear that. I miss everything. Thank you. I think we're done.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.